In the last week of April, Nepal's ruling Napal Communist Party suffered a serious internal rift as rival factions within the party threatened to unseat Prime Minister KP Sharma Oli. As the intra-party rift escalated, the Chinese ambassador to Nepal held a series of meetings with top party leaders. According to local media reports, the Chinese ambassador requested that ruling party leaders maintain unity and avoid a split. Now, the rival factions have since backtracked and have now put up a united front on the controversial new map. Nepal's government on Sunday tabled a crucial constitution amendment bill to formalize the country's new map, which claims parts of India as its territory. The principal opposition party has extended its support to the government, but the Madheshi parties are non-committal. On this edition of The Big Picture, we will analyze Nepal's internal politics. Joining me on the program today are Manjeev Singh Puri, former ambassador to Nepal, Professor Swaran Singh, chairperson, Center for International Politics, JNU, and Major General Ashwini Srivastava, retired defense expert. Thank you to all my guests for joining me on this edition of The Big Picture. Ambassador, let me start the program with you. There has been a lot of churning that has taken place in the political dynamics of Nepal over the last month and a half. How would you look back at what has happened politically in Nepal?
Frank, thank you for having me at the program. Let me tell you this, that although the Nepal Communist Party won very handsomely in the elections held in December 2017, the fact is that the party was brought about as a result of unity between two major leaders. These particular factions continue to remain. Even in the erstwhile UML, the party to which Mr. Oli belongs, itself there were factions there. So what you have really seen is at the end of this particular period, now roughly 2 years, you're seeing these factions come to the fore, the kind of internal power struggles. Now, there are many conversations of what seems to have happened. There was a kind of division between Mr. Oli and Mr. Prachanda. One would head the party, the other would do the prime ministership. Then there was co-chairmanship of the party. One would take on the prime ministership. So many of these things have happened. The net result is that there is contestation, and this contestation was certainly very rife about, as you said, a month or so back.
Okay. Professor, since we are here, these factions seem to have somehow put their differences aside and come together. What has been the big factor that has bound all these factions together over the last couple of weeks? And they all seem to have put up a united stand now as well as far as the map is concerned, with the opposition, also the principal opposition, the Nepali Congress, extending support to the government.
I think you are asking a very important question here. What makes all these different factions, including the opposition party, Nepali Congress, come together to push a certain agenda? Having problems within the party, having factions, India is a democracy. We are used to parties having factions, parties having problems, different claims being staked over a period of time. That's not what disturbs India. We are fine with that. Two things disturb us. One, that the facilitator of unity, in fact, the facilitator of unity from the very beginning in 2016, has been our northern neighbor, China. And Ambassador would vouch me the kind of intervention that we have seen the Chinese ambassador, how Yangchi doing by traveling from one place to another, constantly kind of ensuring that this government stays together, makes the government perhaps a little obliged to what China wishes them to do over a period of time. That is what disturbs us. And what we are seeing, and that's the second component of what disturbs us, is this whole, in order to save his own prime ministership, Prime Minister Oli is pushing this radical nationalist agenda, which is not difficult, which is not easy for anyone to defy. All parties have to support any radical nationalist agenda, and we are seeing at least the Nepali Congress party, which initially asked for a certain amount of time, finally has come around. Madheshi parties, as you just mentioned, are still kind of reluctant about these things. And that radical nationalism, simply with the very limited interest of saving his own prime minister, He's already agreed to sort of change the prime minister to another person after COVID-19 is over. But that is what is pushing them to do such crazy things as middle of the COVID-19, they are issuing a map, they are using very foul language against India, they are putting, deploying, police force to create new posts on the border or so-called claim. So artificial creation of this additional territory on India at a time which does not help us understand why Nepalese are doing this unless they are subservient to somebody else's interest. And I think that is what disturbs us. And not the fact that there are factions, then there is instability politically inside Nepal.
Okay. General, we've spoken about the political parties. I'll come back to the China angle in just a bit. But, if you look at the other side of the spectrum, the general of the Nepali army, in fact, has said that he does not want to take part in this. We should not politicize this particular issue. And this issue should be resolved between India and Nepal diplomatically. And we should not, up the rhetoric is what the general in Nepal has said. So what do you make of the statement of the Nepalese general?
Frank, first of all, we must understand that, as very rightly you said, that as far as the Chief of Army Staff of India is honorary Chief of Nepal Army, and Nepal Chief is honorary General of Indian Army. So there are a lot of bondage between India and Nepal. There are 30,000 soldiers from Nepal origins are serving in Indian Army in various regiments. So this bondage is of a great thing. So whatever, the comment which was passed by the Chief of Army Staff, General Nawane, said that whatever is being done by Nepal is being done on the behest of someone else. So directly the hint was toward China. So whatever, objection which was raised by only government, KP Sharma only, basically on this Lipu Lake road, which is going from Dharchula to Lipu Lake and then further go to Kailash Mansarovar, is in Indian territory. And so far, Nepal had never raised any observation to that once it was being made or once, these pilgrims were going. So why have this been done now? Now, this was the main question. Is it on the behest of China? Is it under the pressure of China when China is trying to show its pressure in Ladakh? So to that extent, General Naramne has said that possibly on the behest of someone else was no one else but China. But to make it look like that, what you said, that as far as the Nepal chief is concerned, they have passed this comment. But I have read on the other website that they have denied it. They said that no, as far as the Chief of Army Staff of Nepal is concerned, he is under the constitution, and whatever statement which have been given in the Indian media is false. So possibly what it looks is, he is going to toe the line of the government of the day, which is there today is the National Communist Party. So we have to be careful and what we are saying. But my point is, we have to toe our line very carefully. The issue is very sensitive. Basically, that India and Nepal enjoy cultural, social, economic, political, religious, and military ties. So therefore, and these ties are very old. So whatever decision which we take it, we have to be very careful. We cannot allow this problem to linger on. Now, two things which stands out is we must understand this Lipu Lake, Kalapani and Limpudhura. Earlier, the Limpudhura was never been added by Nepal. Now, this is additional which they have added, and this has been made as a part of Nepal and shown wherein there are about 90 square kilometers which is added. Earlier, there was a dispute slightly on Kalapani, because in 2015, when the China and India had agreed that Lipu Lake will be used as a trade route between both these countries, Nepal has raised an observation on that. And because tacitly, China has given, okay, that this is a part of India. But this is very strange if that is the case, as to why now China will put tremendous pressure on Nepal to raise this issue. This we have to see. But all said and done, Nepal is a very close friend of India. And at this time when we are trying to resolve our issue with China, we must not raise the temper. We should try to resolve this issue with Nepal diplomatically and peacefully immediately after COVID-19, so that the secretaries foreign secretary can meet and sort out this, because lingering on this problem is not good for both the nation.
Right.
Okay, all right, Ambassador. Yeah, go ahead, Ambassador.
Let me say a few things, because I think it's important for the viewers to get this idea right away. First, let me talk about the internal politics in Nepal. Let us understand quite clearly that the principal playbook in Nepal is anti-India, which masquerades as nationalism. Second thing, Nepal has always given play to geopolitics, especially when it comes to things which are contestations with India, I mean, some place to China. But of late, I must tell you that the West is also quite active in Nepal. So let's understand this. Now, when we talk about who instigated, what instigated, let me tell you the situation within the Communist Party prior to the government taking up the map issue was one of great difficulty for the Prime Minister to hold on to his seat. And so therefore, we mustn't under any circumstance undermine the fact that this is perhaps the best life-saving or seat-saving thing that could have been done. It of course also affords him a great legacy as being a great Nepali, because the Communist Party, frankly speaking, doesn't have any of these great legacies. Mr. Prachand takes credit for removing the monarchy, the Nepali Congress for ushering in democracy, etc. Now, this does not at all underestimate the role of the Chinese. Obviously, they had an interest in the matter. But let us not try to underplay the interest of saving yourself, the seat itself, and the domestic politics in Nepal. Having said this, let me make a small point to you about the dispute. Now look, in the area of Kala Pani, for many years, there has been a small area in which there have been discussions between the two sides as to whether it is part of India or in Nepal. Nepal has laid claims to it. This is because the Kali River, which is supposed to be the westernmost boundary of Nepal, stops at a particular point. There are two tributaries which come there. Historically, it has always been the Kala Pani tributary, and this area is somewhat to its right, as they say, a bit of the east, but that's a separate problem. What the Nepalis have done this time is to have said that the tributary further to the west of this particular place from where Kali starts is the real start of the Kali River, and have hence added nearly 400 square kilometers. You know, that beak-like projection that you see, which is what is requiring them to actually amend the map, because they have got the map as part of their emblem, their national symbol, and that is recorded in the constitution. Hence the entire requirement of a constitutional amendment, which is now in process. The last point I want to make to you, and Professor Swaran Singh made that very well. In Nepal, identity politics is not only vis-a-vis India, but there's a strong identity politics within the country itself. But basically speaking, and we have seen it most recently, most strongly in 2015, when they adopted the new constitution of Nepal, that people who come from the hill areas, they always coalesce around a certain worldview of Nepal and the way they constitute their society. And so, really speaking, the Nepali Congress coming around on that was something which in the end one would have thought would have happened, and it has happened. The Madhesi groups are now going to be actually challenged on their nationalism versus this particular thing. And Mr. Oli, in some senses, seems to have cemented his and his party's place as a great nationalist himself and a nationalist institution of Nepal.
Absolutely. I think that's a very valid point, and these are very important observations that you made, Ambassador. Let me take this issue of the Madhesi groups forward with the professor. You know, where does this leave the Madhesi groups, and are they now going to be facing a battle for survival going forward, and also in this battle of nationalism, the bigger battle of nationalism, Professor?
Indeed, other than the Nepali Congress, which had, of course, traditional pre-independence links with Indian Congress, and was seen as a kind of India's connection to Nepal, Madheshi parties have also become kind of India's concern. And you remember, India had strongly objected to the constitution that was already being adopted. Indian Foreign Minister now, then I think Foreign Secretary had visited there. And, you know, India's connection with Madheshi parties have also at least been kind of a rancor, you know, unnerving to several Nepalese politicians. And so now when Madheshi parties are showing reluctance, it would again be read as maybe India is kind of encouraging them to take a certain stance. But two very quick things. One, that nationalism inclusive of anti-India sentiment is common to all India's smaller neighbors. What is different or additional in case of Nepal is that being in Himalayas, which itself is kind of geologically evolving, river beds are constantly changing, and we are talking here of 100 years. We are talking of British treaties here, right? So if we are going to go back to British treaties, you can imagine how river beds have moved. The problem between China and India also right now is going on partly because of river beds have moved. River beds move. In addition, if you look back, not just one map, but series of maps that British were making from middle of 19th century towards end of it, there is also imperial, what we call cartographic aggression that has happened over a period of time. And it is a payback time now. Only is doing exactly that. He's doing cartographic aggression against India now, based on the confusion as to which particular tributary of the Kali River would be acceptable as the boundary line. Now, issue here is not these cartographic, legal, historical complications. Issue is that India and Nepal, and Ambassador would vouch, he's lived there, is a porous border. You have about 600,000 Indians living in Nepal. There are marriages crisscrossing, all kinds of life is mixed up. General mentioned about Gurkhas, 30,000 Gurkhas, Gurkha rifles in Indian Army, about another 130,000 Gurkhas in Nepal. Ambassador must have dealt with them, the pensioners. It's a kind of unusual relationship in which case the boundary demarcation looks very strange to be raked up like this. That's what I'm saying. It is not the issues. It is the motivation, the ulterior motive behind the issues, whether it is the Chinese, propping or encouraging and emboldening some of these elites, or is it the specific prime ministers trying to desperately save his own chair? In fact, all of us who have engaged with friends in Nepal know that last several weeks there have been rumors of his resignation and his government falling, and desperate attempts to somehow continue until next week. So these ulterior motives is what is dangerous. And my last point here is, as Ambassador just now said, Nepal's map is part of their national emblem. And if it is once adopted as part of constitution, it will be difficult for any future leader to then go back and say, I'm going to compromise on that territory. So I think India has to be careful and intervene at this stage when there is still something unclear about whether constitution amendment is going to take place or not, because hands of successive leaders in Nepal would be tied in making any compromise once that map is adopted as part of constitution, becomes part of national emblem. I think we have to really wake up and then respond maybe in a hurry. And these foreign secretary level talks, one is hearing Nepal is asking for pretty long time. I understand both states are in middle of COVID-19, but I think the way these things have been pushed from the Nepalese side requires India to wake up and engage. It's possible that India is already engaging. Sometimes we are not aware of how India is engaging various components in Nepalese elite. But I really hope that Indian side is engaging them and will at least find a way to postpone this whole issue of resolution for amendment coming in National Assembly.
Okay, all right, General, I want to take up this issue of the Chinese interest in Nepal with you. Traditionally, we've seen that China has not openly played a role in politics in Nepal. But of late, that has changed. I mean, we saw the ambassador of China to Nepal openly speak to the political parties in Nepal and, play a very proactive role. How concerning is that? And why are the Chinese doing this at this point in time?
Frank, first of all, before that, I just want to touch upon this Madheshi issue. We must understand, when we have had a blockade in 2015, and so the Nepalese have blamed India, government was involved in trying to help out the Madheshi. And Madheshis are those, in 1857, when there was a mutiny, the Nepal has taken the side of the British Army, and British government thereafter, as a tribute, gave this area to Nepal after 1857, the part which was in India. So Madheshis are the originally Indian origin, and they were given to Nepal after 1857. So that point has to be also taken into consideration, that Madhesis are more toward India than toward Nepal at times. And that is why we wanted to, see their interest, and this blockade which Nepal keep on blaming that India was totally involved in it. That was the basic reason. Now, as far as China is concerned, China is in a big way want to come in Nepal. That we must understand. The Xi Jinping has visited Nepal in October 2019. He has signed 2-3 treaties. One is that transit and transport agreement with they have signed it. Basically, the supply line on which Nepal was totally dependent on India is now no more there. They will also able to now have some sort of trade through China. Second thing is that they are trying to now build a road which is coming from Tibet, Goirang, and coming to Kathmandu, and then going toward the west in Pokhara, and to the south, which is going to Lumbiani. So therefore, this road which will be made will be in 25 years. It will cost $3 billion, and this will be a road which will have more than 90% tunnels / bridges. So this is a question which has to be seen how difficult it is, but China has gone. So China wants to take Nepal in its own wings. China knows that there are certain Tibetans, almost 30 to 40,000, which are there as a refugee in Nepal. It only wants that there should be no anti-China sentiments in Nepal by this Tibetan. Now, as far as the other issue which is concerned is why Nepal is not dependent on China than India. The reason is the Himalayas. That if you see the topography of Nepal, the Himalayas are a big hurdle between Nepal and China. The heights are ranging from 6,000 to 20,000. So therefore, the communication line from China to Nepal are very difficult, and hence this $3 billion which road is being perceived to be constructed in 25 years, we as Indians are perceiving that this will put Nepal into a total debt trap of China, because Nepal is a poor country which has a GDP of $28 billion. They will not able to pay as a soft rail. So there is a danger. So what is happening is the topography of Nepal is much more convenient toward India, because it's tapering to the Gangetic Plain, and then going from Nepal toward Gangetic Plain and going to Chittagong / Calcutta, from where the trade takes place, is much easier rather than they going toward China. But China, notwithstanding this, to break this hegemony of India with Nepal, they are now saying from landlocked to land-linked. Now, every time Nepal was considered as a landlocked country, now China is saying that Nepal will be no more landlocked, it will be land-linked with China, and from there they will be able to take the port facility. Now, this point we have to be very, very careful in future.
Okay, all right. Time to get closing comments now from all my guests with the best way forward. So we are in a tight spot right now, Ambassador. How do we wriggle out of this? How do we engage? How do we be more proactive? Of course, India has said that we want to engage with Nepal. The offer has been made on several occasions. What's the best way forward, Ambassador?
Frank, just a little point. The word land-linked was used by us, by the way. This was in the context of our offering inland waterway services going all the way to Nepal. Now, look, the Chinese have always been players. They have been kept constrained by technological abilities, by money abilities. They are rapidly overcoming these particular things. Just as the Chinese have an intent, or rather the Nepalese are asking the Chinese to build a railway line from the China-Tibet border, the Tibet border to Kathmandu and then on to Lumbini, so are we in the process, and we have gone fairly ahead with building a railway line to Kathmandu. You know, these lines were never built in the old days simply because these are the young fold mountains, the changing geology. It's a very, very difficult track to build on. But now technologies allow you to do things. The way forward. Look, I'm very clear in my mind. Nepal and we enjoy special relations at the level of people. And yes, contestations with Nepalese political leaders have been happening right throughout 70 years. Let me remind you that brinkmanship is almost part of their psyche and the way they work. And there have been many such instances as difficult as today, even though now this time they're writing things in stone. But that's exactly what they did in 2015 when they enacted their constitution. So things always become more challenging. Absolutely no doubt about that at all. But the way forward continues to remain one of engagement. You need to engage at all levels, at political level, because we know them, we speak the similar languages. You need to engage them at the bureaucratic and specialist levels, and above all, ensure and see that these relationships, which have the advantage of both geography and the rich legacy of history, are used by everyone to move forward. Frank, before I close, I want to make one small point. We are in the midst of this COVID pandemic. Nepal, 30% of its GDP is made up of remittances from overseas, and about 20 to 25% of its population is overseas. Can you imagine the kind of economic impact that can happen? And just about the only economy with which Nepal can interact, legally speaking, historically, naturally, is the Indian economy, and hence this is the time to try and work together. And we need to speak to them, they need to speak to us, but we need to speak in a constructive, bilateral manner which seeks to ensure that the very strong public people-to-people relationship is leveraged for even greater strength, especially at the times of the COVID pandemic.
Absolutely. Professor, quick closing comment from you.
I think very clearly, I agree with the Ambassador. India has multiple connections in both society and elite of Nepal, whether it is media, intellectuals, politicians, and officials. I'm sure we need to engage them. We need to explain to them how India-Nepal relations are completely unusual and how much Nepal enjoys benefits. I sometimes say Nepalese in India have almost all the rights that Indians have in India, other than electing politicians to government offices. That unusual relationship is important. But you remember, Ambassador also said they are now pushing the brinkmanship in the relationship. They are taking it to another level. And I think that would require, unusual initiative. We all know yesterday, Indian Prime Minister received a phone call from American President. And we understand perhaps that is an invitation for India to be invited as to become part of the G7 summit meeting,
right,
which is postponed, which America is hosting. I think at some senior level like that, a kind of direct communication will be required at this stage to basically, as I said, ensure buying more time and making sure that resolution gets postponed and there is a space to maneuver. Because that is something we should definitely try and avoid, and we should help Nepalese avoid it, because they are being pushed into it not because they want to claim their territory. You remember this. They are being pushed into doing this because of their own personal problems of staying in power. And I think that if we understand that, then we can definitely help postpone this crisis, and we'll have time to deal with it in future. As Ambassador said, we have dealt with these crises several times over, so this is not first time. But some high-level intervention, I think, is now required at this stage.
General.
No, Frank, two quick points. One is that, whatever has happened in past is slightly different than what has happened this time. Two issues. One is that, as what we are saying is 32,000 Gorkha soldiers are serving in Indian Army. It becomes a sensitive issue if this case linger on. And 101.25 lakh are the pensioners which are staying in Nepal of Indian Army. So this is become very important. We cannot let this problem linger on. It affects their morale. That we have to see it. Second issue which we have to see it is that in case this amendment is passed in the Parliament of Nepal, then going back becomes slightly difficult. Now, what is stopping us? Why can't we open the channel from Foreign Secretary to their Foreign Secretary or our Prime Minister to their Prime Minister? Talk it and sort it out. The point is that the initiative lies with us. We are the big brother. We should feel, because there is a sentiment in Nepal that India is a hegemonic country, which we should break. We should now take a step forward and try to resolve this issue before this amendment becomes, passed in the parliament and becomes slightly difficult. This is my take, and I only request to the government of India must take initiative as a big brother and resolve this issue before, the things become slightly in uglier shape.
Frank,
Okay, all right. On that note,
instead of
very quickly, Ambassador, I have limited time. Yeah.
Instead of big brother, elder brother. General
Okay, elder brother. All right. On that note, then I'll
brother.
call it a wrap on this edition of The Big Picture. Thank you to all my guests for joining me on the program and putting things into perspective for us. What's coming out of this discussion is that I know it's summer, but we have to work together to ensure that we bring down the heat and not take it up, is what the panelists are suggesting. Engage more proactively and at all levels, people to people, bureaucratic and political as well, and ensure that we move together and move forward together, because it is in both the nations' interests that we do not have any kind of conflicts. With that, it's a wrap. See you again next time.